Well, good morning, everyone. How are you? And welcome to this special event. It is an honor for me to introduce Dr. Arati Prabhakar, Director of the White House Office of Science, Technology, and Policy, and Assistant to the President for Science and Technology, to our campus today. It was actually just last week that Dr. Prabhakar reached out to me in an email, which really caught me off guard, and said we would be interested in having her come to campus before the end of the semester. I said, it's the last week of classes. I don't know if we're going to be able to pull this off. But she said, let's give it a try. And two, former DARPA people, we said we're going to give it a try. And while I know this is a busy time of the year for all of you, it's a great opportunity to have her present today. So I said yes, not only because Dr. Prabhakar is an amazing individual, but also because this is a topic at the heart of the University of Maryland community and all of the research, innovation, and outreach that happens here on our Do Good campus. An engineer and applied physicist, Dr. Prabhakar has had an exceptional and groundbreaking career leading federal research and development agencies and working with startups, large companies, universities, government labs, not-for-profits across a wide variety of sectors. In 1993, she was confirmed by the U.S. Senate as the first woman director of the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, and later served as director of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency from 2012 to 2017. In 2019, she founded Actuate, a nonprofit organization to develop new approaches to innovation for society's essential challenges, and is a fellow of IEEE, a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and a fellow in the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. In her talk today, A Better Tomorrow, Science and Technology's Essential Purpose, Dr. Prabhakar is going to explore a topic central to the mission of the University of Maryland and higher education in general, with great progress and grand challenges ahead for our climate, our health, the AI revolution, and more. How do we make sure we build the future we all want? Please join me in welcoming Dr. Arati Prabhakar.
Thank you so much, Darryll, and what an incredible pleasure to be back here on your wonderful campus. It's been way too long, and I'm really delighted to have this chance to be with all of you. Thanks so much for joining us. President Biden loves to tell this story about how Xi Jinping, who's now the president of the People's Republic of China, many years ago said to President Biden, how would you define America? And President Biden said to him, America is a country that can be defined in a single word, and that word is possibilities. And the fact that this is how President Biden thinks about this country is one of the reasons that I was lit up a couple of years ago when he asked if I would come to the White House and serve in this role. Because in now a very long career, 4 decades in science and technology, that's very much how I think about the role of science and technology in our society. And what I wanted to do today is share a few perspectives from that vantage point, and then also invite your thoughts and questions. We're in a very interesting period. It's a period of change. It's a period of great uncertainty. It's going to be a period that calls on all of us to make really thoughtful choices about where we go and what we do going forward. So I think it's a great time to have this conversation. And the place to start is with the purpose of science and technology, which is to open possibilities so that we can achieve our great aspirations. And if you think about what America's aspirations are today, our aspirations are as great as they have ever been. Some of them are relatively new. Aspirations like meeting the climate crisis and overcoming it, aspirations like using artificial intelligence and other technology advances to strengthen rather than to erode our values. Some of our other great challenges and aspirations are things that have always, they're the forever tasks, but they now have to be tackled in the new reality that we live in. Think about the forever challenge and aspiration of health and opportunity for every single person in our country, not just for a chosen few. Think about achieving a vibrant economic growth that creates good paying jobs in every part of our country. Think about national security and global stability, and think about the calling to always expand the frontiers and the boundaries of knowledge. These are things that we've always wanted, but we have to go after them in a different way today. And so to me, it's no surprise that we have great ambitions. America should always be a country that is filled with great ambitions and aspirations. That's who we are. And achieving these huge aspirations takes a lot of things. It takes everyone in every sector. It takes communities, and it takes policies, and it takes companies and industries. But the science and technology community plays one particular role in achieving these aspirations, and that is to change what's possible so that we actually can open pathways to achieve these things that sometimes seem impossible right now. So today I want to share with you some glimpses of possible futures in 3 areas. We're going to talk about health, and we're going to talk about climate, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, and I want to show you what the future could look like, dark or bright, and then I want to tell you about the work we've been doing to get America on the right path in each of these areas. And so let's start with health. Here's a postcard from a pretty dark future of health. It's a future that unfortunately is possible. In this future, a kid grows up in poverty. He grows up eating poorly. He drinks water that's contaminated with lead and PFAS. Exercise isn't really part of his life. His friendships are drying up because he's falling deeper and deeper into his online world. And he is in a family where he has family members, relatives who are dying early from diabetes and from heart disease and from cancer. Unfortunately, that's a reality that already exists for too many of our kids today. But in this particular future, we're going to add to all of that the fact that in this future, vaccination rates drop so significantly that we're below herd immunity. And so all of that taken together means that this kid grows up expecting to live only until maybe his 50s. Think about that for a minute. So 36 countries today have longer life expectancy than the United States. That's unacceptable for the richest country in the world. And in this dark future, we slip even farther behind. So that's pretty ugly. There's a very different future that's possible as well, and it's the future we want. It's a future in which kids grow up running and jumping and playing. They're out in nature. They have thriving friendships and family relationships. They're able to eat all kinds of healthy food. They're drinking clean water, and they're breathing clean air. And in this future, infectious diseases still break out once in a while, but no infectious disease ever becomes a pandemic. And in this future, many, many families never have to find out that a loved one is going to die early from cancer. Think about what that could be like. And so this is a future where people can take robust health for granted and get on with their lives, do all the things that they were meant to do. So the question for all of us is, so what do we do to make sure we get to this future? And I think this is a great example of one of these really daunting challenges, because when you start thinking about it, it really seems overwhelming. But some of the work that we've been doing in these last few years in the Cancer Moonshot, I think, is a great and very hopeful example of what really can change outcomes at this kind of scale. President Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden started the Cancer Moonshot back when he was vice president. They reignited it when he was back in the Oval Office a few years ago. And when they reignited the Cancer Moonshot, they set a couple of very aggressive goals. One is a quantitative goal, which is to reduce the age-adjusted cancer death rate in half in the next 25 years. That's about double the rate of progress we've been making, so that's a big deal. It's millions of lives. And the second goal is a qualitative goal, which is to change the experience that people have as they're going through the cancer process, patients, but also their families and their caregivers. And if you know anything about the Biden family, you know how personal cancer is for them. But the President and the First Lady also know that it is personal for every family in America who is untouched by cancer. And they really saw this as a place where we could pull together and make a huge advance on something that matters to everyone in the country. So when I showed up a couple of years ago, I was very excited to get to be part of the Cancer Moonshot. It's run by Danielle Carnival, who leads the Health Outcomes Unit within OSTP, where I am now. But when I came in the door, the number one question in my mind was, were we just going to write a bunch of really nice new research papers, or were we going to move the needle on cancer outcomes? And if anyone knows Danielle, you don't have to talk to her for longer than about 5 minutes to know that the answer is we're going to move the needle on cancer outcomes. And the reason is that the Cancer Moonshot approach was, from the beginning, was to say the only way we're going to really get there is to attack cancer by preventing cancers, as many as we can, by detecting as many cancers as we can early and nipping them in the bud, and then fully treating and aggressively treating the cancers that we still have to deal with. And we've made huge progress on all three fronts. And I'll just give you a few highlights because so much work has gotten done under the Cancer Moonshot. For prevention, the EPA has put in place the first ever national drinking water standard. What that means is that over time, 100 million Americans will be protected from PFAS in their drinking water. We're doing the work through the Inflation Reduction Act and other bills to remove lead pipes across American households. We have known since before Christ that lead in drinking water is bad for your health, but we're finally going to get at it. In early detection, we've made a host of investments to expand screenings. So it's not just people who have primary care and regular insurance coverage, but more and more people who can get the benefits of early screenings. The PACT Act for our veterans made sure that all our veterans are screened for the toxic exposures that they may have had in active duty service. A huge change there. And then when it comes to treatments and care, when you look at what the president has done to reduce the cost of health care for so many Americans and to continue to expand the number of Americans who have health insurance, we're at an all-time record high today of Americans who are insured, including under the Affordable Care Act. What those actions mean is more and more Americans can actually now afford the treatments that we know save lives, and that is going to move the needle in some really significant ways. We've also expanded cancer patient navigation services. These are the people that you go to when the doctor says the C word, who help you figure out how to get the world to stop spinning and get your life organized and actually be able to take care of yourself. That's now a service that for 150 million Americans, if they get cancer, that's a reimbursable service under their insurance plan. So that's a big deal. And looking ahead to the next generation of innovation and everything else that we need, the president not only boosted funding for the National Cancer Institute at NIH, but he also started a new ARPA, an Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. Darryll and I both have the privilege of knowing what DARPA has done for national security. The president knows it too, and he was really clear that we needed to bring that kind of additional, very solutions-focused innovation to augment the great research that we do in health. And he started ARPA-H with initial funding over a couple or 3 years of $4 billion, and they're off to the races. So when you look at that set of work that's gotten done under Cancer Moonshot, think about the impact it's going to have over not just a few months or years, but really for decades into the future. And I think that's going to make a huge difference on cancer, but it also tells us a hopeful way that we can approach these broader issues of American health outcomes. So those are some thoughts on health. Let's shift to climate. Let's see if I can push the right button to talk about climate. So, you know, climate too is a world in which we can have we can imagine a fairly dark future. Today, not in the future, but today, we're living in a world in which average temperatures have risen 1.19 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And already at that level, we're experiencing climate impacts that we are not enjoying. We are experiencing extreme heat and drought and wildfires. We're experiencing extreme storms and flooding. We're experiencing the breakdown of the biodiversity that all of human life depends on. And in one future, in a dark future, we go into feedback loops on climate change with our natural systems interacting in ways that spiral out of control. And in that future, our planet becomes less and less habitable, and we go headlong into the sixth mass extinction event, where the biodiversity that's really the foundation for all life, including human life, really spirals away. And that's obviously a very grim future. Now, we know that the climate will keep changing, but it's in our hands how severe those changes get. And so in a better future, we decarbonize and we achieve net zero emissions fast enough to limit the frequency and the intensity of all of these extreme weather events. And we do that in time to avoid the most severe tipping points. We renew our relationship with nature. We not only use nature's gifts to help manage a changing climate, but we hit the brakes on biodiversity loss, and we take the actions that we have to take to build resilience in every community. And this is an area where the president and the vice president have taken the most ambitious actions anywhere, any time in history to address and step up to this climate crisis. On day one, President Biden rejoined the Paris Agreement. He has put in place critical emissions rules to limit carbon dioxide emissions. He passed two very significant pieces of legislation, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, which together amount to the most significant investment in clean energy. Public dollars that are drawing far more private dollars and putting all of that capital to work to deploy clean energy solutions so that finally we are deploying clean energy at a scale that the climate notices. That's a massive scale, and we have finally gotten started on that. In addition, we're making significant investments today in climate adaptation and resilience across communities in all parts of the country. And President Biden is the first president to set some very important goals for conservation. An initiative called America the Beautiful that has set a goal to conserve at least 30% of our lands and our waters by 2030 to start restoring this relationship with nature, which is so critical. And all of these actions, I used to feel quite hopeless about our ability to meet the climate crisis in time and at a scale that really works. We've now shown that that's possible, and that gives us, I think, enormous energy for the very substantial work that is still ahead. And so some of the work that's been undertaken in research and development in recent years is about getting ready for so much more that still has to come. And that includes R&D that helps us get to where we can massively scale and deploy all these other technologies that we're going to need to fully decarbonize. I'm talking about modernizing grids and battery storage and advanced nuclear, including small modular reactors. And then the next generation of the technologies that still have to get to commercial viability. We're seeing progress now with advanced geothermal and with fusion. That's what it's going to take to fully decarbonize. We've got a lot more work to do there, but the pieces, the ground is being laid for that. And similarly, the work to continue to build resilience in communities, to make sure people are getting the information they need to be able to plan for resilience and to take the actions that we need to tailor crops and figure out how our food system will evolve. The research has started in those areas as well. And finally, making nature an integral part of our economy and our national security, and understanding that being deliberate about bolstering nature is going to be essential for meeting all of our goals for the thriving of this planet. That's some of the work that's gotten done now, and a window onto still, obviously, the very significant work that still needs to be done. That's about climate. Let's turn to AI. So artificial intelligence is one of these really, really powerful technologies today. A lot of its power comes from its tremendous breadth. And when you think about the kinds of futures we could have with AI, we could imagine a future where everything is phenomenally efficient, but in that process, discrimination and bias in housing and loans and in criminal justice and in healthcare gets implemented at massive scale because of this tremendous efficiency. In this future, every single worker's move and click is surveilled, And in this future, misinformation and disinformation and deepfakes are so rampant that they distort our reality. And fraud is so rampant that trust is completely destroyed. And perhaps worst of all, there's no privacy. There's no protection between you and corporations, you and the state, or even you and your neighbor. And so that's a pretty dark future, and I think without paying serious attention to where AI is going, I think we could certainly end up on this path. Some of those things are unfortunately, part of our lives already. But on the flip side, if we can get AI right and build a stable platform by managing AI's risks, that's a stable platform that we can stand on to reach for the stars. And it's not that we're going to use AI to sort of wave away complexity or just take dangerous risks off the table. But it could, if we do this right, AI can be a tool that helps us wrangle that complexity and navigate our way through the challenges and open up pathways that we really just couldn't have imagined before. And that, I think that really applies to all of these different areas and challenges that we've been talking about. So let me tell you a little bit about what we've been working on AI. First of all, I'll tell you, I started in this job in October of 2022, and in November of 2022, ChatGPT came out. And my life got completely hijacked by AI, but in a really constructive way. Because that moment when generative AI burst on the scene was a moment when AI, which had been behind the scenes, right? You knew it was behind the ads and whatever was in your social media feed. You may or may not have thought about the fact that it was behind the price you paid for an airline ticket or the diagnosis you got when you went to see a healthcare provider. So it was there, it was a little bit in the background. With generative AI, with chatbots and image generators, it was in our faces. And so it created a moment that President Biden and Vice President Harris seized to say, look, we have got to get this country on the right track for AI. It is the most powerful, most consequential technology of our times. And what we know about every powerful technology is they each bring a bright side and a dark side. And our task for the administration, but for the country and the world, our task is to manage AI's risks so that we can achieve its considerable benefits. And a whole lot of work got done, executive order, working with industry, working globally, working with Congress. But let me tell you what is starting to happen in people's everyday interactions today that I think is a demonstration of starting to get on the right track for AI. Today, when you go to the bank and you put in a loan application or mortgage application, almost always there's an AI model that's evaluating your application. And today, because of rules from our Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, whether you get a yes or a no, you're owed an explanation that goes with that so that you can do something about whatever that answer is. Today, if you go see a healthcare provider, it used to be that the algorithms that they were using, the AI engines that they had trained on prior healthcare decisions, were being used to generate answers to questions of what your diagnosis was, what your treatment would be. And if you think about that, we know that we have very troubled histories of embedded bias in the way medical decisions have been made. You have only to look at Black maternal mortality to see some really horrific stories of really inappropriate medical decisions. If we are simply distilling the kinds of bias in those poor decisions from the past into these very efficient algorithms, that's just not acceptable. And today, our Department of Health and Human Services has a rule in place that healthcare providers have to make sure that they are not embedding inappropriate kinds of decision-making and bias and discrimination into these algorithmic systems before they use them for our health care. And finally, the Federal Trade Commission has a rule today that says that that you can't use AI to impersonate a business or impersonate a government agency to commit fraud. So again, these are very practical examples where we're starting to see the management of AI's risks so that we can get on a track where we can really trust and rely and then start using this technology. So there's a lot more work to do to build that stable platform, but it is time to start reaching for the stars at the same time. And if you look today at what the business community is doing, companies and investors are pouring dollars into building applications for consumers, for business. We want to see those productivity enhancements that can come from bringing AI to business. It has to be done ethically and responsibly. That's critical. But we want those productivity enhancements. But I also think we have to be really clear that that's not the whole story. And we have put a lot of focus in our work on AI, on how we use AI to do the country's work, to go big and solve public missions that we really care about. So think about what's possible if we get AI right, about how we can use it to accelerate how we design and approve drugs. Think about what it looks like when we actually start being able to deliver a much better weather forecast that's deeply trusted to all Americans, especially in this time of a changing climate. And think about what it would mean if we could actually use the advances in AI to help ed tech tools finally actually close educational gaps for our kids. These are amazing possibilities that lie ahead if we can just get on the right track with AI. And all of that is work that has started, but like everything else I'm going to tell you about today, it's very much work that while we're on the right track, there's a lot more still ahead to do. So, you go to most talks and people talk about the past and then they look to the future. So I'm going to do everything backwards. So I'm going to finish with a postcard from the past. Really everything that if you're in science or engineering, what we all do for a living is we set a hypothesis and then we do the experiments to test it, and then we iterate and we keep working until we get solid facts or until we get really practical solutions that solve real problems. But the underlying reason to do all of this work is that if we get this right, we can help all of us in this country succeed at the great experiment that tests the most inspiring hypothesis of all. And that is this hypothesis, this idea that we the people can form a more perfect union, and the idea that we can secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. Americans have done this through 2.5 centuries, and now it's our turn. This is our great privilege for those of us who get to work on science and technology, and it's also our great responsibility. And I'll just finish by saying what a privilege and personal privilege it is for me to be part of this broad science and technology community with all of you here at the University of Maryland as we do this work for our country. Thanks so much for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Well, we thought we would have a fireside chat with Dr. Prabhakar, and I don't think I've ever seen a more inspirational and creative talk that uses postcards from the past and the future and tries to build a more perfect union by honoring this experiment called America, right? And so
that's what it's all about. Yep.
How about another round of applause for Dr. Prabhakar
so
for
nice.
her service and this visionary leadership. So I have questions that I'm going to ask Dr. Prabhakar that's been curated from the audience, faculty and staff. So I may call out your name, I may not call out your name, not to pick on you or anything. But the first question actually comes from a student. And it's a very simple question. What does the director of the Office of Science and Technology and Policy do? And so maybe you can just start there and then I'll do a follow-up.
Sure, this is a two-hatted role.
Yeah.
One part of the job is to be the president's assistant for science and technology, and that means anything that the president needs that's about science and technology, which turns out to be in everything, basically, these days. And so that's one role that's a staff role to the president. The other role is leading the Office of Science and Technology Policy. We're about 140 people at the White House. And almost all of my folks are people who are on detail from other parts of government, sometimes from places like the University of Maryland on a rotation for a period of time. And what we are doing is figuring out how we bolster American science, technology, and innovation, the federally funded R&D, and the broader ecosystem to make sure it's robust, to make sure that it's aimed at the challenges of our times, and then grappling with the infinite number of challenges that come up about, AI data centers are consuming a lot of energy. How do we make sure we aim that to make sure that it's actually clean energy? Or what is going on with ocean policy around the world, and how do we align nations to make sure we're working towards biodiversity goals together. It spans everything, and it's a place from which you get to see the whole picture, which is why I treasure it. And there are days when it's just fun. I'll tell you one story. In my science advisor to the president hat, one day I got an emergency call from NASA, which is either going to be really good news or bad news. Turned out it was great news. I called Pam Melroy, who's the deputy administrator there, and Pam said, there's a research conference. Someone's about to present this research result, and it's going to be in the news, and I wanted to give you a heads up. So a couple of hours later, in the New York Times, there's a headline that summarizes it perfectly. The headline is, NASA is not saying it found life on Mars, but it's very excited about this rock. And the Mars rover had found a rock that had these little dots with black rings. It could be a biosignature. It's in an ancient riverbed. It could be ancient microbial communities from 3 or 4 billion years ago. And I thought, this is really cool. And then a couple of hours later, I learned I needed to be in the Oval Office to tell the president about it that afternoon. So that day, I had to learn all about the Mars rover. I had to learn about ancient microbial colonies and why they would create a little white splotch. And I had to learn how life starts. And then I had to explain that to the president. So that was just, that's not like every day, but that was a super fun day.
That seems like a great day. I mean, I'm an aerospace person, so I really love this story, first of all, because we always want to understand whether life can survive on other terrestrial planets. And part of that is what you're talking about and explaining to the president that life can be sustained. So another question from a student is sort of back to your background. So this comes from a student by the name of Masterwal Chakole. How did you discover what you wanted to do? As a college student, I believe many of us face the challenge of finding our purpose. Yeah. From your perspective, what advice would you offer to those in this room who are still exploring, questioning, and growing as students of our future careers?
Well, I think the answer is in the question, which is to explore, question, and grow. That's it. Yes. And when I look back after many, many years, I can tell you a very logical thread that connects everything I did. But you don't know what the thread is when you're starting. And in retrospect, I know every time I left a job, everyone where I was leaving thought I was crazy for what I was going to go do next. It just didn't make sense to them. And now I can tell you that for me, what has always pulled me forward was this question of, how do you build a better tomorrow? That's why I'm so excited. I mean, I was trained as an engineer. I went to Caltech, which is a temple to science. But to me, the whole point of science and engineering has always been, how do you make people's lives better tomorrow? And I was always drawn to the next place where I thought I could work towards that. It's going to be different for different people. There are people who will be drawn to that. There will be people who will be drawn to the thrill of a new scientific discovery. But you don't know what it's going to be for you, right? And especially when you're starting out, and when you have the great luxury of flexibility, try something. And then if it works, do it and enjoy every minute of it. And then go to the next thing, because none of those moments last forever. But it's okay to try something and it doesn't work. I have done that a lot of times. That's not the stuff we talk about, right? But that has happened. I've done that a lot of times. And you go and you don't like it and you learn a lot and then you move and you keep going until you find the next place that really is your home.
So explore and grow, and what was the third?
Learn, I think.
And learn.
I mean, I was in
there
the
you
question.
Go.
It was a
great
advice.
Question. Great advice to Masterwal and all the students. Another question, and it's towards what you said when you first started. You came in October of 2022, and all of us remember this because when generative AI came out and ChatGPT came out, there had never been a technology in the history of the world that had penetrated 100 million people in a month, right? And that was ChatGPT, so user-friendly. However, it exposed all of the issues with AI. So this is a question from a student named Monica Chu. I don't know if Monica's here. But she says, what do you think are some of the most important issues that need to be addressed surrounding the ethical use of AI, as you were mentioning in your response?
A lot of the reason AI has captured so many of our imaginations is because it's so broad. And it's hard to think about an aspect of our lives or a field of research that it's not going to have it can't have a transformative effect. And I think that, to me, that means that you have to answer that question by really thinking through very different application areas. So, the answer to the question is different if you are concerned about let's take AI biodesign tools. This is not large language models. It's AI trained on biological data. We've seen what AlphaFold was able to do. That's just now the subject. The two AlphaFold leaders have just received the Nobel Prize. It's amazing. They've solved a seemingly unsolvable problem in protein folding using AI. So that has huge possibilities for biological drug design, but also as you get better at that, you also get better at enhancing biosecurity risks very significantly. So then when you understand that problem, there are a whole host of things you can do to mitigate the risks and accelerate, which we need to do, accelerate the work on using it to design better drugs faster. So that, in that area, we rolled up our sleeves. We made some advances on biosecurity protections. ARPA-H just started a very exciting new program that's about using AI to accelerate the approval process for drugs. That's a big deal. But you have to go through that process for every application area because each one has a completely different dynamic. And sometimes the risks are security risks and safety risks. Sometimes they are risks of discrimination or risks to privacy. Sometimes they are about the impact on work. Sometimes they're deeply engaged on these very tough intellectual property issues about how you train your models. So I think there's not a blanket answer, but that's the work that we have started on. And I think we have really shown the world, but especially I think the tech industry, that we're at a point where we just can't keep going willy-nilly. We've got to be serious about managing the risks in order to let the innovation thrive.
Now in your remarks, you talked about changing policy, I think, for folks who were trying to get a loan, if I remember. And that was using AI software to kind of exclude some folks. But so there was a policy decision there, or that essentially that would really try to make it not be used more ethically than it had been used. I mean, I remember a story of one of my colleagues who was having their daughter apply to a school, and they were using passports as a way to make sure you would get a bank account. And the bank account was to be used so you could transfer funds for tuition payment. Well, this person was a person of color, and fortunately, they could not read her passport. So she couldn't get a bank account.
From her photo?
From
was
her
it a
photo.
Photo problem? Classic.
Yeah, it was a photo problem.
Right.
And she couldn't, therefore, pay for tuition. So they wouldn't let her register.
Isn't that crazy?
It was crazy, and you couldn't get anybody to respond because it was all these chatbots that would be responding.
Oh my God.
So finally, and this was Barclays Bank, by the way, just to call out someone. And finally, they got hold of someone at Barclays and talked to a real human being and realized that there was an error in the software. And was able to fix it so the person could register in time for classes. But these are the unintended consequences of AI, if not properly tested.
Absolutely, and I think that was an annoying but relatively innocuous example.
Right.
The ones that are unbearable is when you use bad facial recognition technology, as police departments have done. They use it on grainy video from convenience stores. The AI algorithm says the suspect is, John Doe.
Right.
John Doe gets arrested.
Right.
This literally happened. A black man got arrested based on that kind of facial recognition model for a crime that happened in a state he had never stepped foot in, right? A wrongful arrest.
Right.
That's not okay.
Right.
That's a horrible, horrible way to use facial recognition technology. But if you use it right, so I'll give you the good example. When you go through TSA Pre now, it tells you that, to put if you want, you can put your face in front of the camera and it will very quickly identify your face as matching your ID. So that's a very narrow application.
Yes.
And my favorite part is the sign tells you that DHS, that TSA is going to delete your photo.
That's the question I was going to ask you.
Right?
Right, because that's the privacy part.
You got it, right? So it's not just getting accumulated and agglomerated and used for God knows what.
Yes.
And so it's used appropriately, narrowly, and your image is deleted. So now, I don't know if you've noticed, but you zip through those lines. So now we got the efficiency because we got the technology right.
Yes.
That's where we need to go.
Excellent. I have to follow that story. About 12 years ago, I was going through the UK, and they had this technology way ahead of us. And I was reluctant to have my thumb scanned and my iris scanned, because I was asking the equivalent of the TSA person in the UK, where does my data go? And of course they can't answer because they're just doing their job. And I'm like, well, then they're like, you're not going to get in the country if you don't do the thumb scan. And I said, but I want to know where my data's going. And we went back and forth, and I said, I don't want to get arrested, so I'm going to go ahead and go through it all. And this is way before AI stuff. And so I just found that this is where we are, and we just have to make sure that all these protections are there as well for private citizens, right? Because, like you said, they should delete the files once you go through.
So I'm going to say one more thing about
sure.
this, because I think you really, how you choose to use these technologies is actually also an expression of values. And different countries around the world have different values about this. Even the UK is much more surveillance heavy. And if you get to the People's Republic of China, you're in a very different place. Right. And so I think, thinking about this in the context of geopolitics, it's a time when every country's racing to use AI. They're trying to build a future that looks like their values. And so what that means is we're actually now at a moment where American leadership in the world requires American leadership in AI.
Absolutely. So let's move off of AI and let's talk about a broader picture. So this comes from Dr. Patrick O'Shea, who's sitting right here in the front row. Universities are increasingly burdened by complex and difficult to understand regulations that are impeding our abilities to engage in international research, collaborations. What approach should universities take to encourage a rational approach, to regulating international engagements in the future?
Yeah, I think this is part of a broader, longer trend of a whole set of perfectly reasonable requirements turning into a bureaucratic load that's hampering the work that needs to get done. And when I was at DARPA, we used to joke that the federal acquisition regulations was a compilation of everything anyone had ever done wrong. Now there's a rule, and now you have to jump through all these hoops. And what we did back when I was in my first DARPA tour, one of the things we did was we worked with Congress to get cooperative agreement and other transactions authorities, specifically to design a different way to work with entities that didn't build a big machinery to deal with the federal acquisition regulations. And I think it's a good example of the need to do the pilots and the experiments to find different ways to work. Because once we start clogging ourselves up, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot when we can't really move. So that's the bigger picture. Right. The international piece of that, though, I think also needs a little bit of attention because, the fact of the matter is, I'm old enough, I grew up at DARPA in the early days when we were in the middle of the Cold War. Right. So I've seen a lot of changes in the world. The most significant thing that has changed in geopolitics in the last 15 or 20 years is, of course, the rise of China. Yeah. And unfortunately, the Chinese Communist Party has crossed the line in its behavior economically, its behavior militarily, and it is, there is a very significant situation to be dealt with here. And that includes the inappropriate lines that have been, the illegal things that have been done in terms of stealing intellectual property. Now, we all understand that basic research is not that, and it needs to be dealt with in a different way. And that, in fact, research doesn't thrive unless it's done in a global setting. So I think research security has been a particularly challenging and vexing thing to get right. Yes. And we've done some work to try to get it on the right track and to minimize the additional burden, but in the end, it is still an additional requirement on universities. So again, I think every one of these measures gets implemented for a really important reason, and then when you're done, you still have too much. So I think I think it's time to think in a more fundamental way about how we deal with all of it, while recognizing that the problems we're trying to solve are real problems.
I was talking to the national labs tend to do this pretty well, right? These international collaborations and agreements, with like-minded partners, but with the security measures in place as well. So I think universities can learn a little bit from the national labs.
Yeah, because national labs have to go from completely closed to completely open, and they know how to structure all of that. Yes. Yeah, and universities typically don't, or really don't do the fully classified deep stuff. So
one last question, if I may. Yeah. So this comes from Dr. Christopher Kaufman, another faculty member. It seems that the public confidence in science is not as robust as it once was, with widespread public doubt of climate science predictions and the efficacy and safety of vaccines, as you mentioned in your own talk, as two prominent examples, do you have any advice to students and teachers today on how we can work towards establishing public trust in the results that scientists report?
Yeah, no, I think this is really important. First of all, I'd say don't take it personally, because this is part of the decay in trust in institutions of all sorts. And so it's part of a much deeper national challenge that I think we have. I think it's actually a global challenge right now. And I do think there are things that fall on our shoulders, that are our responsibilities. One is, I think, simply to be humble and recognize. I think what doesn't work is to speak from the mountaintop and preach the science. It's not a faith-based religion. It's actually the opposite of that. It's about facts. And I think if we approach the way we talk about our work by saying, you know, these are the best facts we have, we're going to keep trying to get better facts, but this is our best understanding right now, and facts are useful things because they allow you to make better choices that allow the world to unfold in a better way. I think that's a better approach than to say you should believe me because I speak science, right? Like I don't think that's going to be very effective. That's how we communicate, but you know, the fundamental issue here is that the pact that science and technology makes with society is that if society funds this work, it is going to deliver a better tomorrow for people. Right. And we have to deliver that, right? We can't, and that is more than just writing great new research papers. That's something we've gotten phenomenally good at. And we shouldn't take it for granted, right? Vannevar Bush in the mid-40s said, we're not so good at that, and now the rest of the world is in rubble. We better get really good at basic research. Well, we did that, and we should never lose that. We should always be the leader in every field of basic research, even as others continue to rise and get better. But we have to recognize that here we are in 2024, almost 2025, and just doing great basic research is not fully translating into a better future for a lot of Americans. Right. And that's our job too. So again, I think as I thought about my role at the White House in this period of time for this president, it was both to try to strengthen federal R&D, but also to make sure that we aimed it at the great challenges of our time. Yeah. And that's maintaining a strong basic research foundation, but also making sure that it actually turns into the impact on people's lives across the country.
Well, what a way to end. Dr. Prabhakar has painted a picture for us for the future through postcards. I think it's a good vision for our nation, and it upholds the ideals of our nation. It's been an experiment of a democracy for over 200 years now, and it's been working, but we've got good work to do. She has served 4 decades on behalf of this country in science and technology, and for that, she deserves more than a round of applause, but give her a round of applause for coming to the University of Maryland today.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me. What a pleasure, Darryll.